The late afternoon sun bathed the open highway in a warm golden hue as Chris tightened his grip on the steering wheel. The hum of his old sedan was the only sound accompanying him on this solo road trip, his first in years. The plan was simple, a scenic drive to clear his head, with no destination in mind, just the promise of open roads and solitude. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery streaks of orange and pink, Chris realized he was hours from the nearest town. He glanced at his fuel gauge, half a tank, enough to keep going for a while. He rolled down the window to let the cool evening breeze in, the scent of pine trees and asphalt filling his senses. The stretch of road was nearly empty. Occasionally, another car would pass by, headlights flashing momentarily before disappearing into the distance. But as the hours wore on, Chris noticed something odd. One car, an old black SUV, seemed to reappear every so often. At first, he dismissed it as a coincidence. After all, it wasn't unusual for vehicles to take the same route on long stretches of highway. But then it happened again and again. The SUV would appear in his rearview mirror, tailing him for miles before suddenly veering off onto another road or falling back. Each time, Chris's unease grew. Was it just his imagination, or was the car deliberately following him? To test his theory, Chris decided to switch things up. He took an unexpected exit, navigating a winding road through a dense forest. The headlights behind him vanished for a while, and he began to relax, convincing himself he was just being paranoid. Then, as he rounded a sharp curve, his heart sank. The SUV was back, its headlights cutting through the darkness like two predatory eyes. Chris's palms grew sweaty against the steering wheel. He told himself to stay calm. Maybe the driver just happened to be taking the same route. Maybe it was nothing, but his instincts screamed otherwise. Chris decided to pick up speed, his car's engine protesting as he pushed it harder than usual. The SUV matched his pace, staying a steady distance behind. Panic began to seep in as the realization hit him. This was no coincidence. Spotting a gas station up ahead, Chris made a quick decision. He pulled in, parking under the harsh fluorescent lights. The SUV drove past without stopping, and he let out a shaky breath, his pulse racing. He stepped out of the car, stretching his legs and trying to shake off the lingering fear. Inside the small convenience store, the cashier greeted him with a tired nod. Chris grabbed a bottle of water and a pack of gum, more to buy himself time than anything else. As he paid, he glanced out the window. The SUV was back, parked across the road under a dim streetlight. "You okay, man?" the cashier asked, noticing Chris's pale expression. Chris hesitated. "Yeah," he lied. "Just a long drive." Back in his car, he debated his next move. Should he call the police? Drive to a nearby town and find a motel? Every option felt inadequate. The SUV hadn't done anything illegal, but its presence was suffocating. Determined not to let fear control him, Chris decided to confront the situation head-on. He pulled out of the gas station, making a deliberate U-turn to pass by the SUV. As he drove past, he tried to get a good look at the driver. The windows were tinted, but he could make out a silhouette of figure sitting unnervingly still, as if watching him. His heart raced as the SUV's headlights flicked on, and it began to follow him again. This time, Chris didn't hold back. He floored the accelerator, his car roaring as he sped down the highway. The SUV followed, its engine a low growl that seemed to echo in the night. The chase continued for what felt like an eternity. Chris's mind raced through possibilities. Who was in that car? Why were they following him? Was it random, or had he done something to provoke this? Finally, Chris spotted a motel up ahead, its neon sign flickering like a beacon. He swerved into the parking lot, his tires screeching. The SUV slowed down but didn't follow, lingering at the entrance before driving off into the night. Chris sat in his car, breathing heavily, his hands trembling on the wheel. Inside the motel lobby, the receptionist looked up from a book, startled by Chris's disheveled appearance. "Room for one?" she asked. Chris nodded, barely able to form words. He took the key and hurried to his room, locking the door behind him. The small, dimly lit space felt like a sanctuary, if only temporarily. He sat on the edge of the bed, his mind replaying the night's events over and over. Just as he began to relax, there was a knock at the door. Chris froze. The knock came again, louder this time. His heart pounded as he approached the door, peeking through the peephole. No one was there. He stepped back, his pulse thundering in his ears. Then he heard the faint sound of footsteps outside his window. He turned, his breath catching as he saw the shadow of someone standing just beyond the curtain. The figure didn't move, just stood there, as if waiting. Chris backed away, His mind racing, he grabbed his phone and dialed 911, his voice shaking as he explained the situation. The operator assured him that an officer was on the way. The minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The shadow outside the window remained, unmoving. When the sound of a car engine finally reached his ears, Chris almost cried with relief. He opened the door to find a police officer standing there, her hand resting on her holstered weapon. "We didn't see anyone outside," she said after a quick sweep of the area. "But we'll keep an eye out. Let us know if anything else happens." Chris nodded, though the officer's words did little to ease his nerves. The SUV was gone, but the feeling of being watched lingered. That night, he barely slept, every creak and rustle amplifying his fear. In the morning, Chris checked out of the motel and hit the road, his eyes constantly flicking to the rearview mirror. He didn't see the SUV again, but the experience had left an indelible mark. The open road, once a symbol of freedom and escape, now felt like a trap. Even weeks later, back in the safety of his apartment, Chris couldn't shake the paranoia. Who had been in that SUV? What did they want? He'd probably never know. But one thing was certain. The road had a way of revealing the unexpected, and not all of it was welcome.